Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm going to start things off with a comment on previous week's news. The mainstream media are continuing to put out stories about foxes attacking babies and young children. A few weeks ago, I saw on the front page of the Daily Mail the picture of a fox at night climbing over a garden fence where allegedly a child had previously been attacked by a fox. Why this sudden massive increase in evil fox stories? Are foxes really out of control, as our newspapers seem to suggest? It is our view that those in the establishment who wish to re-legalise hunting foxes with dogs are putting these stories on the front pages in order to sway opinion, so that at some point in the near future, when they put forward their proposed change to the law, people are more likely to accept hunting with dogs. These stories are nothing more than a psyops operation. I have no way of knowing whether the stories are genuine. Perhaps they are. But none of them warrant the headlines in the news, British national newspapers, and on BBC main television news. We here on the Starship object to the programming of the public through a controlled British media. If we see in the coming months the government tabling the bringing back of fox hunting, you heard it here first. Kenny McCaskill, who made the decision to release the Lockerbie bomber, has rejected a plea to attend a US Senate hearing. The bomber, Mohammed al-Megrahi, who was convicted in 2001 of killing 270 passengers in 1988 on a Pan Am jumbo, was let out of prison on compassionate grounds because he had cancer and was given just 3 months to live. People are now saying that he could live for 10 years. The request by the Americans for McCaskill to be interrogated about his decision is, of course, total theatre. The real reason why Megrahi was released, which the mainstream media are conveniently ignoring, is that Megrahi's legal team had appealed against the original conviction, and his lawyers have compelling evidence that witnesses lied at the original trial and that he was framed and is totally innocent. His team is believed to have enough new evidence to overturn the original conviction, which would then cause people to ask the question, who really did blow up the Pan Am jumbo? Some rumours suggest that a certain individual who lost his life on the plane was the target of American intelligence, and that the other 269 murdered passengers were included to disguise their single targeted individual. If Megrahi had been released because he was innocent, as many people believe he is, this would have been very embarrassing, as a new search for the real perpetrator would begin. So to get round it, they most likely faked his cancer situation in order to avoid the appeal. The Americans now have to keep digging themselves into a deeper hole with more lies, pretending to be annoyed at McCaskill, who was simply a puppet on the end of their evil strings. It's time to introduce this week's guest onto the Starship. And this week, our guest has a degree in psychology and media. He has an MA in film studies. He is also studying hypnotherapy and is the lead guitarist of the band Thought Crime. He has spent the last 10 years researching the subject of mind control and how our perceptions of reality are being purposely constructed by exterior forces. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. It's Neil Saunders.
Hello.
Welcome on the Starship, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy the trip?
Oh, very much so, yes.
Good. Now, we're here to talk about a subject which I'm fascinated by, that of mind control.
Yes.
And we've been discussing it, obviously beforehand, and it is a huge subject,
Oh,
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's vast, absolutely vast.
So could you start by telling us sort of when would, sort of modern mind control, when did that all start?
Well, I mean, even that is sort of mired in mystery itself. I mean, officially MKUL, which is the American mind control project for sort of mind-controlled assassins and Manchurian candidates and things like that. That's
so MKUL. So why is it called MKUL?
Well, this is where the twist comes in, because the MK comes from a German word for mind control.
Right.
Now, mind and control, and essentially MKUL started under Sidney Gottlieb in 1953. However, basically it used a lot of techniques that were already in use by Nazis in Auschwitz, Josef Mengele and such like that. The sort of British arm of mind control would be the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is ostensibly it's a charity organisation funded by Rockefeller, among other people, that deals with crowd control, applying psychological techniques to society, and you know, how to deal with mass brainwashing, essentially. That started in 1921, and in 1932 the directorship was taken over by a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who was a German psychiatrist, and later he was taken over to America to start the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA.
Right.
A lot of the techniques were using sort of Operation Paperclip Nazi officers that were brought over to America.
This was after the war.
This was after the war, but obviously this was
Yep.
before 1953. So you could assume that basically the official start date of 1953 was probably not. It was probably going on a lot of time before that.
Right.
In fact, if you wanted to research the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's passages in there that talk about trauma-induced dissociation, using potions to induce comas and spells or hypnotic trance styles to, you know, enslave people and essentially make them mind controlled.
Now, the Americans are believed to have used mind control to do with the Korean War.
Well, MKUltra was a response, officially, it was a response to Korean and Chinese mind control techniques. There was about 7,000 prisoners of war, American prisoners of war during the Korean War, and about 95% of them made full confessions to basically whatever charges were brought against them.
Right. So was this American prisoners or Korean?
This is American prisoners.
American prisoners.
And officially, in 1953, MKUltra started to try and counteract these Korean brainwashing techniques.
Right.
There was psychiatrist Wolf and Hinkle sent a memo to Alan Dulles in 1953 explaining the Chinese and Korean methods of mind control. And essentially these were using isolation, sensory deprivation, putting people in stress positions so that they can't sleep, battering them with sound, and letting them know that there's no way of getting out of this without confessing to the crime that they're accused of.
So is that what you would term stress-based trauma then? Or
yeah, that is essentially stress-based trauma, but it's more using coercive methods and people's wants to be part of a greater whole. What they were doing in the Chinese methods, they would put the prisoners in a cell with several rabid pro-communists who would hate any deviation from the sort of state mandate, and they would let him know with violence and with psychological threats. And essentially, after so many weeks of this, your character becomes moulded to fit the society that you're in. The thing about the Chinese and Korean is that they used no artificial means. It was all to do with human weakness and coercion.
Okay. Now, with people like Mengele in World War II, he was a Nazi who, I believe, went to Argentina after the war.
Yes. Yeah.
And his techniques were somewhat more sinister.
Well, basically, he used trauma bonding or trauma. It works like this. If you've ever been in a car crash or you've ever had severe depression or anything like that, you'll find that sometimes you won't remember it. If you were in a car incident, I remember the car swimming out in front of us and I remember waking up. And what your brain does is it closes off certain parts so that you don't have to relive that trauma again and again and again. Now, if you sort of understand how the brain works, you can manipulate this and you can use it to your own means. And what trauma-based mind control is shattering the mind through trauma, making it dissociate into separate compartments like a honeycomb. Now, what you can do is you can basically implant a personality or make it seem that each of these compartments is a separate personality, completely separate and unaware of the others. And by that you can go into dissociative identity disorder and basically, shatter people.
So Mengele, would you say he was one of the ones who started the trauma-based?
He was certainly,
He worked with twins a lot, didn't he?
Well,
tell us about that. Why did he need to use twins?
Well, I mean, a lot of people would think that it was to do with genetics and things like that, and it certainly was, but it's a way of using a double-blind test. You've essentially got the same genetic material and you can try the same things out against people. Also, basically, twins have got a very, very, very tight connection, and what he would often do is make twins kill their sibling in front of him,
Really?
and yeah, absolutely. And again, this would cause dissociation.
Yeah.
What's really strange about Joseph Mengele is that he was so successful that he introduced this thing called trauma bonding, which is like a sort of Stockholm syndrome. Many, many years later, even today, survivors of his horrendous techniques will refer to him as Beautiful Joseph. They won't hear a word against him. They think of him as their saviour.
And did he use any medical techniques, do you know?
Yeah, well, he was experimenting with, drugs, barbiturate-induced comas. They basically ran the whole gamut, and this was available to them because obviously they were at places like Auschwitz where they had a regular supply of human experiment, people that they could experiment on. And they've used electroshock, and all these methods were then basically taken across to America and to England and continued by scientists working with the CIA and MI5.
CIA and MI5. In the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazi leaders were on trial, is it Ewan Cameron?
Ewan Cameron.
Ewan Cameron.
Yes.
Tell us about him.
Well, Ewan Cameron was he was actually based in Canada for the majority of his time, and he was interested in a thing called de-patterning and psychic driving. Essentially, he sat on the board for the tribunal for Nuremberg, prosecuting the German
Nazis,
doctors,
yeah.
yes, for their human experimentation, whilst at the same time carrying out exactly the same experiments. What he essentially did was, as we know with Operation Paperclip, a lot of German scientists were moved back to America anyway, and their research was just carried on. And he was, it's highly hypocritical that Ewan Cameron was doing exactly the same things to patients, unknowing patients, members of the public, that he was prosecuting Nazis for.
So the CIA got some of their early techniques from the Nazis?
Oh, totally, absolutely. Right. Most of it was based. I mean, they tended to, when it was started in 1953 under the technical service staff with Sidney Gottlieb, they tended to use more LSD at the beginning.
Right.
They found that LSD was a very, very sort of useful drug for this sort of thing.
Well, the Nazis didn't use LSD then?
Not as heavily as the CIA. They were more interested in certain other techniques. But under Sidney Gottlieb, they were dosing up lots of people. Notably, Whitey Bulger, the mob boss, he was part of MKUL, and he complained about hallucinations, voices in his head, nightmares for years afterwards. And that he was personally dosed up by Sidney Gottlieb.
So, what would be the CIA's ultimate reason for looking at LSD? Why does the CIA need mind control and LSD? What are they ultimately trying to achieve?
Well, I mean, officially when it was started, it was for things like double agents, truth serums, poisons, and things like that. But also you could use it for hypno-programming, like basically dropping a large amount of information into people's brains and using them as unwitting human computers, spies, essentially.
So they would then go out into society and say X, Y, and Z, so there would be disinformation agents, effectively.
Possibly, or they could just be used as spies. I mean, one of the notable hypnotists was George Estabrooks. Now, he was basically concerned with hypno-programming during World War II, and one of the things that he said was that basically he can hypnotize any person to do anything without their knowledge or consent. He can hypnotize people to commit treason against their country, completely breaking their moral code, and without their knowledge. And this was later sort of confirmed by another psychiatrist, J.G. Watkins, who actually did experiments with soldiers. What he would do was he would hypno-program a suggestion into their head, and they would attack superior officers in this particular experiment. In one case, an officer ended up getting stabbed. This is how absolutely total the control can be. And George Estabrooks would say that the key to this is to shatter a person's mind, to create multi-personality or dissociative identity through hypnotism. And he's said many times this is not science fiction, he's done it. So,
Right.
I mean, Ewan Cameron himself was more interested in de-patterning, which is essentially using electroshock, drugs, drug-induced comas for 65 days at a time, LSD for 60 days at a time, and this would completely wipe the personality, allowing for new patterns to be psychically driven onto the person, and this would be done using embedded headphones and looped messages that you
Right.
just cannot turn off.
And I mean, we'll come on to it in a later section, possibly programming Manchurian candidates.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely possible, and several psychiatrists have spoken about this, that it is possible.
Okay, well, we're going to talk some more after the break. We're going to talk about the Tavistock Institute a bit more,
Absolutely.
which you touched on,
Mm-hmm.
and psychotronics, which involves microwaves, I believe.
Psychotronics is essentially electronic means of mind control, like
Right.
exterior electronic means, and well, it could be brain implants, or it could be, wave, ELF,
Right.
subliminal messages.
So we've got psychotronics, which is electronics and microwaves, and that kind of. You've got drugs like LSD and
Yeah.
probably a lot of other drugs as
Mhm.
well, and then you've got hypnosis.
Yes.
Are there any other? I mean, obviously there's television and media, which is
Well, there's
considered mind control, but are there any other techniques?
Well, I think it's just really about manufacturing consent, isn't it? It's not really about facts. It's more about public perception. And if you can make the public perceive something, that in itself is mind control.
Right. So you would call that a psyop.
I would.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay then. All right then, Neil. We're just going to go for a short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back on board the Starship, and we're talking with Neil Saunders, who is a researcher of mind control. Now then, Neil, we mentioned the Tavistock Institute, which is a British institute which is responsible for a lot of mind control research, is that?
Yes, it would certainly appear so. Basically, Tavistock is a charitable organisation based in London, although